I told William we're going to do something just a little bit different in a moment, but we want to go back to the beginning of the chapter, and we want to notice that what takes place here is a meeting in Jerusalem, and that meeting, we remember, was occasioned by some people who were trying to get the Antiochians, I guess that's a word, if they didn't I just made one up, to follow both the old law, the law of Moses, and Christianity, and meld the two together. Chapter 15. And this is something that really is very, very prevalent in the religious world that calls itself Christian in our time. Most religions meld different things of different religions together that they like about those religions, and then they try to claim it's pure Christianity, but it is not. And so this meeting was occasioned, and Paul and Barnabas go to Jerusalem, and there they met with the elders and the apostles that were there. And these apostles and elders listened to all of the presentations that were made, and then Peter made a speech, you remember, showing how the Gentiles were accepted and proved by Cornelius, refers to him. And then James spoke, and James laid out 4 items that the Gentiles should be required to do, and was going to write a letter so that nobody could go by, oh, well, I heard them say this, or I heard them say that, whether they did or didn't. It's in writing. And so now it's firm. And so when we get down to verse 21, notice it says, "For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day." Now, we know that in part that's a generalized statement because not every city had a synagogue. They had to have, I forget now how many men it was, maybe William or Charles can remind me of that, but had to have so many men and families that could then have, in order to have a synagogue. Either one of you remember how many?
I think it's 10.
Was it 10?
I think it is.
Okay. Does that sound right, Charles?
Yeah.
Okay, so 10 men. I'd forgotten, but anyway, the text talks about the law of Moses, and in essence it's saying the law of Moses was known far and wide. I would say known of, not necessarily known. They may not have known the precepts and concepts of a lot of it, but they knew some of it. It's just like today. If someone wants to criticize you and I as a Christian, all we have to do is do one little thing wrong, or a suspicion of something wrong. And they know a lot about Christianity, but they don't understand it, nor do they truly know it in the sense of being able to practice Christianity or obey it. So the Jews, when we look at them, it seems that they believe that the law of Moses was not binding. If the law of Moses, as Paul was teaching, was not binding on them today, then the Gentiles seem to have felt that, or the Jews rather, seem to have felt that the Gentiles would be free to participate in any pagan immorality that they wanted to. That seems to have been their attitude. The Jews thought of the restrictions that we noticed that James talked about as only belonging to the law of Moses. In other words, those weren't binding on you unless you were a member of or a follower of the law of Moses. That seems to have been their attitude. And this letter from Jerusalem, thus, would reinforce what Paul had taught as that's not the case. The law of Moses is not binding on anyone. These were laws that had always been in existence. I call them eternal laws. So why did the law of Moses deserve respect? Did it deserve respect? And if so, why? Well, when we look at Galatians 3:24, I think we have basically the reason. It was designed to lead people to the teacher, the Christ. And so, being designed to do that, it accomplished its task. The prophecies could be looked at, and if they had chosen to do so. And isn't it interesting that when Herod and the wise men came to him and asked where Jesus was, this king, Herod went to the leaders of the time, the religious leaders, and what did he do? He asked, where is he going to be born? And what did they say? Bethlehem. They knew. And so, in many cases, you find people dishonest in dealing with the prophecies about the coming Messiah, claiming they wanted a Messiah, but then being dishonest with those prophecies that should have led them straight to Jesus. Remember in Romans 15 and verse 4, we're told, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. And that fits exactly with Galatians 3 and verse 24. Now, jumping off here, doing a side step, so to speak, because it talked about the law of Moses being known in every city and every synagogue, and it was taught in every synagogue or read in every synagogue, I thought I might do something just a little bit different from there for some of us, maybe to remind us of the time and the world in which they lived. This is not going to be something that is exhaustive, because as I did some reading in various places, I quickly realized that if you were going to do justice to all of the themes, that we're going to be looking at, it'd probably be a book of around 1,000 pages or more in 9-point font. But let's think about the time for a moment, and I want to go back to around 9 to 12 AD. This was the time in which Jesus was 12 years old. Now you say, well, why do you say 9 to 12 AD? Because there are two calendars, and there's a calendar mistake that was made. And so somewhere in 9 or 12 AD, Jesus was now 12 years old. Well, let's then think about this. What was Jerusalem like at that time? Well, if you went into the city of Jerusalem, and we're not interested in conveniences or lack thereof. For instance, today we can travel in a car and go 60 miles in no time at all. And then it would have taken about 3 to 4 days to go that same distance traveling there. We don't care about that. I don't care about the modern conveniences like our cell phones, and they had to holler at each other or send a message, and took whoever knows how long to get it to where it's going. What I want us to think about is who would have been basically in the city. And so you start looking around in Jerusalem, and you would have seen farmers and their beast of burdens bringing crops and trade goods and things to the people. You would have seen traders and shopkeepers as they're plying their goods that had been brought to them from various places in the world or from the countryside, the food, etc. You would have seen women shopping, and you would have seen children playing in the streets, wouldn't you? But that's not all you would have seen. You would have seen people from many cultures and many backgrounds in Jerusalem. This was a city that in many ways was an important city in a number of years, but it was important and not only for the fact that Jesus was going to be born close to there, and this would be where the church would begin, but also from trade aspects. There would have been a lot of trade going on. There would have been a lot of people going through Jerusalem from place to place. But you would have also seen another class of people. You would have seen the priest. Most of them were Sadducees. A good number of them were Pharisees. And the Pharisees especially, were people who liked a lot of pomp and show, and you can almost see them strutting around the city and all of these things. You would have also seen philosophers from different Greek schools of thought. This was not uncommon. People thought of Jerusalem, or seemed to think of Jerusalem as kind of a primitive place, but it was not. There were a lot of, quote, very educated people. Oh yeah, there were your others that were not educated, but most of them, or many of them, were. And there's one more class that you'd see. Roman soldiers. Well, why was that the case? Well, we'll get to that in just a few moments. But did these people have anything in common? Now, at first glance, we might look at it and we say, well, you know, farmers and this, quote, lower class, they wouldn't have had too much in common with the priests and all that. Well, there was something in common, and I'm not talking about their religion. I'm talking about their language. You know, we Americans are kind of weird. We're an oddball nation. We really are. Because most nations either know two languages or more, or a language and a dialect. And that's common everywhere. I can go to Indonesia and I see this over there. They speak Malay, which is very similar to Indonesian. They speak Singaporean, which is a different language. And most nations of the world, you go to Europe and notice how many people speak several different languages, at least enough to get along. Americans, we're not usually like that. We don't teach our people to speak two languages. Oh, I know, we gave lip service to it. And when I was in junior high, they had Spanish class, and I took it. And they had a Latin class. I think Jenny took Latin. No, French, German, French. You know, you could take a class, you went to the class for a year, and within 6 months afterwards, because you didn't use it, you lost it, right? Oh, but we fulfilled a language requirement for college, you know, big deal. The language they spoke that was common was what we would call Koine Greek. Koine means common. It was the common language of the people of the world of that time. Most people did speak some bit of Koine Greek, maybe Latin and maybe Macedonian and all kinds of different languages. But what about government? In their world, Rome was the center of government. Now, if you traveled from Jerusalem to Rome, that was a distance of 1,434 miles. This was a journey that would have taken you months to make. Even by ship, it was a long journey. Most people believe it was anywhere from a month to 45 days if you went by ship. Now, this 3-month journey to Rome made it where this was an imposing thing. You and I, we can travel 1,434 miles if we push it in 2 days in our cars. For them, it took about 3 months. And Rome was the center of government because it was the occupying force of Jerusalem, that whole area of the world. In fact, most of the known world of that time was controlled by Rome. And they had a lot of soldiers stationed all over the place, and especially did they have them in Jerusalem. And the reason they had so many in Jerusalem was not just because it was a major city, not just because it was basically the capital of this particular people that they had conquered, but it would also remind them of their servitude. And it would remind them that, hey, look, you people want to be insurrectionists all the time, and we're here. We're going to stop it. We'll put an end to it. And they had to do that quite often. With the soldiers came another group of people, hated, despised by the people of any of the nations they conquered. Oh, you know, tax collectors. And generally speaking, Rome farmed out, so to speak, the tax collecting to people who were indigenous to that area. They charged them a fee to collect the taxes. They told them how much to collect, and anything they collected over that was theirs. This caused some tax collectors, in fact, some of the early Roman writers referred to them as thieves, because they would charge exorbitant taxes. And so most of them were, but we know one that was not, don't we? Now, at the end of the Roman Civil Wars, we want to go back just a little bit more in time. Augustus was given what is called autocratic powers by the Senate. In other words, basically whatever he said, it was like a king in a castle in later times, who his word was law. That's it. If he said you die, you die. If he said you live, you live. If he said you pay this tax, you paid it. Whatever he said, that was the law. Before Augustus, the Senate had basically ruled the nation. They decided the laws that would be enacted, et cetera, et cetera. But after Augustus, since he was given autocratic powers, that wasn't the case any longer. And the chief concern for the Roman government was security. They wanted security. They were a warlike people, and they did enjoy fighting, but they would prefer not to. You know, it kind of reminds me of military people today. Generally speaking, military people do not want war. No, but they want to be strong enough that if war breaks out, they win. And that was the same way with Rome. There were benefits from a powerful central government, and just like there are in any country that has a central government, those benefits can be pretty good. You know, you think about our country, some of these benefits that we're going to notice in the Roman Empire are true in our country too. Many of these benefits work together to accomplish something: the arrival of Messiah. Remember in Galatians 4 and verse 4, when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law. When the fullness of time was come, what made it the fullness of time? What was it that caused the right time in God's mind to say, this is when my Son is coming into the world? What needed to take place? And there really are quite a few things, and we're not going to get into all of them, and I'm not going to get into all the details of all of these. But when we think about these benefits of a strong central government, we ask, how do they relate to the coming of a Messiah? Well, first of all, you had a universal law. Now, the Romans were very good at something. They were very good at taking what another people, nation, or empire had developed and then making it better, making it stronger. They had this propensity in so many different areas. The Romans did not do as much as inventing as some in, like the History Channel, would like us to believe. They took things from other cultures and they improved them. Well, one of those was universal law, which they took from the Persians. The law of the Medes and the Persians, what was it?
Everyone was under the law, and once the law was made, it's made.
Once it was signed by the king, right, you couldn't change
You
it.
couldn't change it.
Now, you could work around it by making another law. Do we know somebody like that in the scriptures that happened with? Esther. The law couldn't be changed that all the Jews, it was open season on them on this one particular day. You could kill them, take everything they've got, do them in. Couldn't be changed, but another law was given that allowed the Jews to defend themselves. So universal law provided a basic peace. But they had something else that was very interesting. Again, the Persians were very good at getting messages from one place to another. We might call it today a Pony Express, because that's basically what it was. It was teams of stations all along, and if the king wanted a message sent from the palace to the farthest reaches of the empire, he could write that out, and it would be delivered from horse to horse, rider to rider, and all across the empire lightning quick. By the way, the Pony Express in our nation has been glorified and romanticized. If memory serves me right, didn't it only last about 9 months or a year or something like that? It wasn't very long at all. And then the stagecoach took over, if I remember correctly.
Well, and it wasn't much longer. You had a train.
Yeah, you had railroad. Yeah. So Rome built good roads. Now, think about it. In our street that we live on, North Cross Lane Road, don't ask me why. Lane Road, doesn't make sense. We live on North Cross Lane Road. Across the road is South Cross Lane Road. And South Cross Lane Road goes down for a little bit on pavement, and then the road gets pretty rough, and some of it's just one lane. And then right at the end, it gets to be pavement again. How many times do you think Jenny and I, when we get ready to go to Monroe, take that road? Not very often, right? Now I will, because I got a truck. Truck can go anywhere. But Jenny, she ain't taking her car down that road. Well, think about what good roads do. Good roads, people travel on them, don't they? They'll choose that every time over a bad road. Rome developed roads, most of them built by their soldiers as they moved from place to place. Originally, the same reason we have the interstate in the United States is the reason Rome built roads. Oh, you remember the Eisenhower system? Why was the Eisenhower system built? To allow our armies, if we were ever invaded, to travel quickly from one part of the country to the other, and we made landing strips required straight, long stretches of highway so that airplanes, our fighters, could land, refuel, rearm, etc. Roads, armies, traveling. Rome did the same thing, and they used their armies to build these roads. And not only that, but they also got rid of most of the pirate traffic in the Mediterranean, which was a tremendous problem to trade. Well, after you open up the roads, you're going to absolutely open up trade to be more easily accomplished and from place to place. And when you open up trade, you also open up ideas and communication between further places than you would have had before. And all of these things took place. It brought the world in communication with this Koine Greek that they had so that they could communicate in a better way. Oh, and there was also a common coinage. Now, we might not think of that too much as being an advantage to a time when Messiah could come, but again, it helped with people traveling from place to place to have a common coinage to be able to buy, sell, whatever they needed to do. So commerce flourished. They had the universal language, the Koine Greek. The seeds of destruction for the Roman government were found within itself. And the greatest of these was ever increasing taxes. I want you to think about something here. I've got a record at home. I haven't played it in many, many years. And the album was called History Repeats Itself. And I'm pretty sure probably none of you have ever heard it. But anyway, this guy did this back, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, somewhere in there. And he did different things and showed how history repeats itself. And he goes through this whole spiel. And he says, see if this reminds you of some nation. And he goes through the spiel, and as he's going through it, you're sitting there thinking, he's talking about America. He's talking about all these things that are going wrong. He's talking about America. And then at the end he gets done and he said, did you have another nation in mind? He said, these were all things that happened to the Roman Empire. And we're seeing it again in our time. The increasing of taxes put such a burden on the people that it just gradually weighed them down, and it caused, in essence, the failure of the nation, among other things. There were many things, but that was the biggest one. Let's look at the moral conditions of the world of that time, the world of Jesus, the world of the apostles. Marriage. Well, what about marriage? The pagan religions promoted some of the most vile and immoral acts into society that you could even imagine, and really indicated that they were a driving force, they thought, for the prosperity of the nation and the good of the nation and all of this. Nonsense. I'll give you one illustration. Many years ago, one of my teachers at Alabama Christian School of Religion assigned me a paper about the religion of Babylon. And the religion of Babylon was just like almost all primitive pagan religions, extremely immoral. It was required of every woman, and this is going to be bad in the way we think about things, and it should be. Every woman in the empire was required once to go to the temple, I believe it was Marduk, I'm not positive, but I think it was Marduk, and offer herself as a prostitute for the temple tax to be paid by someone, and it could not be their husband. Now we look at something like that and we say, how horrible, and it is. But it shows the depths of perversity that the pagan religions went to in the name of promoting society, in the name of promoting their government and the well-being and unity of the people. First marriages were usually arranged. Now that can be good or it can be bad. Now, if I told Tori that we're going to find her a husband, and it may not be that fella she kind of likes right now, she'd probably say, you are not. Isn't that right? You can nod your head, it won't fall off. I mean, how many of us would wanted somebody to arrange our marriage? Let me tell you a little secret. My own parents thought Jenny was too good for me. So they wouldn't have arranged for me to marry Jenny. Now, 55 years plus later, we're still together, still working together. We wouldn't like that, would we? But that was common in their time, not just among the Israelites but other nations all around them. That first marriage, either party during that time could file for divorce, except among the Jews who mistranslated and misused the Mosaic law to say that basically only a man could divorce. Well, a woman could do it too under the Mosaic law. But generally speaking, either party could divorce their mate. And many of the marriages ended simply for the sake of change. Again, does this sound familiar? Look at our nation. How many people today divorce just to change? And you know, Hollywood is held up as the example, and that's the epitome of, hey, I'm getting tired of this one. I'm going to get rid of him or her and get me another one. Historians state that women during this time became more depraved than men. I think I saw some of that when I worked at General Motors back when I was a teenager. There weren't many women working in the factories back in those days, but there were some, and it seemed like, well, you just saw a lot that you didn't want to see. They often figured their age. You ready for this? Roman women often figured their age by how many husbands they had. How many husbands they had had. Oh, I've had 14. I've had 10. I've had 4. Whatever. When we think about life itself, the sacredness of life was foreign to the Roman mind. Abortion was very common. I saw something the other day that gives me a little bit of hope as far as abortion is concerned in our nation. It said in the last 3 years, abortions have decreased by 2/3 in the United States. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it's just some propaganda that some group has put out, but apparently there are some statistics that show that it is decreasing. Well, that's good. Hope it keeps up. Maybe it's because some of these states have passed laws that make it a lot harder to get an abortion. A child that was born sickly or deformed was often drowned. Can you imagine that? The Greeks did it another way before the Romans. They would take the child out on a hillside that was not wanted and leave it to either be cared for by an animal, ate by an animal, or someone take the child and raise it to be a slave. Life was just not precious to them. And let me ask you this. Does that ring a bell? Life in our country is no longer as precious, not by any stretch of the imagination. People are now advocating in colleges, some of these loony professors that are out there are advocating that, hey, person gets older, they're no longer a benefit to society, so go ahead and kill them. And some have even taken Jenny's argument. Jenny made this argument and said, you know, these people that advocate that it's all right to abort a child right up to the time that it's born, well, what about a year later? And now they're advocating that. Baby girls were often taken to hillsides and abandoned to die. Suicide was considered an open door to escape the troubles and toils of the world in which they lived. There was no hope in Rome. There was no hope in the empire. Think about it. Everything is terrible. All of this problems. Over half the people in the Roman Empire were believed to have been slaves. What hope do they have? Seneca congratulated the human race on its liberty, which is within reach of all. What liberty? Suicide. And more in our country, we're seeing that being advocated, and more people are doing it, especially the young. It's become a real problem. Is it any wonder then that games like the Gladiators Combat gained popularity, where entertainment was glorified and cheered and considered to be one of the most important things to try and help hold the empire together by the Roman emperors? No wonder. Oh, again, what about in America? Years ago, Florida State came up to the University of Michigan to play Michigan. And of course, Michigan has what's called the Big House. It's a stadium that is the biggest regularly played in stadium in the United States. It will seat about 125,000 people. I'd love to have been able to preach there sometime, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that have been great? That'll never happen. They asked the Florida State players after the game what stood out to them about playing there at Michigan. And they thought they were going to say, this stadium. It's the only true bowl in the United States. Now you'll say, oh, wait a minute, I know of football teams that have bowls, but this is a true bowl. When you walk into the stadium, except for the new bleachers that have been put up, you are at the top of the stadium. You walk down into the bowl. It's the only one like it. I could tell you all kinds of stuff about that, but that's not my point. They said, the people here don't spit on us. In the ACC where they played and in the SEC, the opposing fans would spit on them as they were leaving the field or coming onto the field. Now, thankfully, both of those conferences have cracked down on that somewhat. That's a horrible thing to do. But what I'm trying to get at is this. You think about their reaction. Oh, it wasn't the grandeur of the stadium. It wasn't the amazing sound that comes from that bowl atmosphere. It was the fact that they weren't being mistreated. People in the time of Rome were constantly being mistreated. We have an example of that in the Scriptures. Remember, if you're required to walk a mile, walk twain or two. What was that all about? The Roman army could conscript anybody as they were marching along that they came in contact and make them carry their armor for a mile, a Roman mile. What did Jesus say? Well, if you're misused in that way, if you're abused in that way, go the extra mile, as we would say. Paul testified to the debauchery of the world of his time in Romans 11, verses 18 through 32. I'm not going to read that, but I would encourage you to go and read it and think about what he was describing as taking place in that world. You see, only the moral power of the gospel can change or could change such a world of depravity that they lived in. Only the gospel could give people the hope that they needed to survive and to not rely upon something like suicide or the gladiator games to find an escape. The inward desire for a better life is what caused the gospel to rapidly spread through the world in which they lived. It was a horrible world. Only a few could escape all kinds of problems. Religion. The masses were illiterate. And therefore, they could easily succumb to imaginations and superstitions and idolatry, and somebody like a magician who pulled the wool over their eyes and made them think that he was some great one. Greek and Roman gods were fashioned after the likeness and propensities of human beings and worshipped. Most of the religions of that time involved their gods being like human beings. We'll look at the example they had of human beings of their time. They steal, murder, whatever they wanted to do. If they had enough strength to do it, you do it. It indeed was a time of whoever's the most powerful, shall we say, animal, and we human beings are not animals, using it for illustration. Whoever's the strongest, whatever they want to do, they can do. The mystery religions of the East were very common in that time, especially those of Persia and the Egyptian mystery religions. In fact, in the Roman Empire, there was a lot of Egyptian mythology that was worshipped. Isis was a very special god to many of the Romans. These mystery religions relied upon emotional excitement. Does that ring a bell? Most of the denominations around us rely upon emotion to get their people stirred up, to keep them. And they have to continually improve on those emotions or ways to elicit those emotions in order to keep most of their people. Christianity, it was so much different. Christianity relies upon logic. Christianity is a thinking man's religion. Whereas most of the religions they had were just, oh, here's what we've been told that we should do, and so we'll do it. And oh, the emotions that are played and all of these things. That's not Christianity. Will logic create emotions? Are you excited when you come to worship? Logic tells you by the scriptures that this is where we should be. And it tells us what we should be doing. Does that elicit emotions in us? Yes, it does. But it's not these wild, crazy emotions where anything goes. And more the religions of America are starting to rely upon Zoroastrianism, the Egyptian mythologies, and all of these other things to try and excite their people. In fact, during the Roman Empire, the object of worship was the state through the emperor. Oh, you were allowed to worship any god that you wanted to, but you had to first worship the emperor. The worship of these gods in Roman life did not bring personal satisfaction, nor did they bring moral improvement. And thus, due to pessimism and despair and the insecurity of existence, with no hope for the future, basically, when you die, you're dead all over. Oh, I know some of their religions did advocate something beyond, like a nice field of harvest with no problems and no bugs to eat it up and all that stuff. But they basically felt that their world was nothing but evil. The people looked to the emperors as their hope for the world, but the emperors failed them. They made things worse. The hope offered by the gospel, though, both physically and morally, was new to their way of thinking. It was new to their thinking that you don't take your children out and put them on a hillside and let them die, or drown your baby girls so that you can have more boys born to be warriors. Outside of Christianity, no voice was heard against the immorality of slaughtering gladiators in the name of sport. No voice was heard against the immorality of exposure of infants, slavery, abortion, brothels, and public immorality of any kind. Next week I want to come back and I want to continue some thoughts in these areas. I want us next week to begin by looking at God's contribution to the fullness of time through the Jews. We've looked at things as it was through human eyes. Let's look at how God brought things about through the Jews.